For 8 years, Luna had perfected the art of silence, believing it was the only thing standing between her and a fate worse than death, until the Alpha King heard her whisper his name in her sleep. The kitchen of the Shadow Moon Pack was alive with the controlled chaos of preparing for the monthly pack gathering, but Luna moved through it like a ghost. Steam rose from massive pots, the clang of metal on metal filled the air, and voices rose and fell in the familiar rhythm of organized mayhem. Yet she existed in a pocket of absolute silence, her bare feet making no sound on the worn stone floor, her breath barely disturbing the air around her. She had learned long ago that silence was survival. Luna's hands worked with practiced efficiency, peeling potatoes with mechanical precision. Each movement was deliberate, economical, nothing wasted, nothing that would draw attention. Her dark hair fell like a curtain around her face, hiding the sharp intelligence in her emerald eyes, the way they constantly catalogued every exit, every potential threat, every shift in the room's energy. The other kitchen workers had long since stopped trying to include her in their chatter. After 8 years of receiving nothing but nods and gestures in return, they'd accepted that Luna was simply different. Broken, some whispered. Blessed with silence by the moon goddess, others claimed more kindly. She let them believe whatever stories brought them comfort, as long as they left her alone. But today felt different. There was an electric tension thrumming through the pack house that made her skin prickle with unease. The Alpha King was coming for the gathering, not just their alpha, but the king of all packs, the one wolf whose very presence could command submission from any shifter alive. Luna's knife slipped, and she bit back a gasp as the blade nicked her finger. Blood welled bright red against her pale skin, and for one terrifying moment, she almost spoke, almost let out the curse that burned on her tongue. Instead, she pressed her lips together so hard they went white and reached for a kitchen towel. 8 years, she reminded herself, wrapping the cloth around her finger. 8 years of silence, and you're still alive. Still free. The word free tasted bitter even in her thoughts. What kind of freedom was this, really? Living as half a person, denying the very essence of what made her human? But the alternative. She shuddered and returned to her potatoes. 3 floors above the kitchen, in the Alpha's private study, Kai Blackstone stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the packlands. The view was spectacular, rolling hills covered in dense forest stretching to the horizon, the late afternoon sun painting everything in shades of gold and amber. It should have brought him peace, this visual reminder of his domain, his responsibility, his power. What's the point of ruling over everything if you're connected to nothing? The thought came unbidden, as it had more and more frequently lately. At 32, he was the youngest Alpha King in history, having claimed the title after his father's death in battle 5 years ago. He commanded respect from every pack across 3 territories, his word was law, and his strength was legendary. Your Majesty? The voice belonged to his beta, Devon, who had entered so quietly that only Kai's supernatural hearing had caught the soft knock. The preparations are nearly complete. The pack leaders will begin arriving within the hour. Kai nodded without turning from the window. Thank you. And Devon? How many times must I tell you to just call me Kai when we're alone? Old habits, Devon replied with the easy familiarity of a friendship that had survived the transition from brothers-in-arms to king and subject. You know, you could always skip the formal gathering. Send your regrets. Claim urgent business elsewhere. The suggestion was tempting, but Kai shook his head. The Shadow Moon Pack has been loyal for generations. They deserve better than a king who can't be bothered to show up. He turned from the window, and Devon saw the weariness in his golden eyes that no amount of power could mask. Besides, where would I go? This is what I am, Devon. King first, everything else. Well, there isn't anything else. Devon frowned. He'd known Kai since they were children, had seen him laugh until his sides hurt, had watched him fall in love once upon a time before duty crushed everything soft and spontaneous out of him. You know that's not true. You're more than your title. Am I? Kai's smile held no warmth. When was the last time someone looked at me and didn't see the Alpha King first? When was the last time someone spoke to me without measuring their words for maximum political advantage? The questions hung in the air between them, unanswerable because they both knew the truth. Kai straightened his shoulders, sliding the familiar mask of authority back into place like donning armor. Enough. Let's get this over with. As they left the study, neither of them could have predicted that 3 floors below, a woman who had spent 8 years hiding from exactly the kind of power Kai represented was about to change everything. The pack gathering was held in the Great Hall, a massive space with soaring ceilings and ancient stone walls that had witnessed countless ceremonies over the decades. Luna typically avoided these events like the plague, but the kitchen staff was required to serve, which meant she had to be present, invisible as always, moving through the crowd with trays of food and drink. She kept her eyes down, her movements efficient and unremarkable. The hall buzzed with conversation, laughter, the clink of glasses and the rustle of formal wear. Somewhere in this crowd was the Alpha King himself, though she hadn't dared look for him. Just knowing he was here made her skin crawl with anxiety. The mantra that had kept her alive for 8 years played on repeat in her mind as she navigated between groups of pack members. She was so focused on remaining unnoticed that she almost missed the subtle shift in the room's energy, the way conversations grew quieter, how people unconsciously straightened their postures, the electric feeling that preceded the arrival of a true apex predator. Luna felt it like a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders, and despite every instinct screaming at her not to, she found herself lifting her head just slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse of. Golden eyes met hers across the crowded room, and the world stopped. What do you think Luna's biggest fear is about being discovered? Drop a comment below and let me know what you think is really driving her desperate need to stay silent. Those golden eyes held hers for what felt like an eternity, but could only have been seconds. Luna's breath caught in her throat, her carefully maintained composure threatening to shatter under the weight of that penetrating stare. The Alpha King was even more imposing than the whispered stories suggested, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and features that seemed carved from granite. But it was his eyes that truly undid her. They weren't the cold, calculating gaze of a predator she'd expected. Instead, there was something almost lonely in their depths. The tray in her hands began to tremble, and Luna quickly dropped her gaze, forcing herself to move through the crowd with mechanical precision. He's just another pack member, she told herself desperately. He doesn't know. He can't know. You're invisible, remember? But she could feel those golden eyes tracking her movement across the room, and for the first time in 8 years, her carefully constructed armor of silence felt paper-thin. Kai couldn't explain what it was about the serving girl that caught his attention. She moved differently than the others, not with the eager deference most pack members showed him, but with a kind of desperate invisibility that paradoxically made her impossible to ignore. There was something hauntingly familiar about the curve of her shoulders, the way she held herself like she was carrying an enormous weight. And her eyes. When she'd looked at him, just for that brief moment, he'd seen something that resonated in his very soul. Fear, yes, but also a profound loneliness that mirrored his own. Fascinating, Devon murmured beside him, following his gaze. That's Luna, the mute girl from the kitchens. She's been here for years, but nobody knows much about her. Never speaks, keeps to herself. Mute. Kai's eyes narrowed slightly. There had been something in her expression when their gazes met, not the blank incomprehension of someone who couldn't process language, but the sharp intelligence of someone who understood everything and chose not to respond. Born that way, apparently. Or maybe traumatized into it, the stories vary. Devon shrugged. She's harmless enough. Works hard, causes no trouble. Kai watched as Luna disappeared through a service door, presumably returning to the kitchens. Something deep in his chest tightened, though he couldn't name the emotion. I think I'll get some air. Luna's hands shook as she set down the empty tray in the kitchen's washing area. The other servers were still in the great hall, which meant she was blessedly alone for the moment. She gripped the edge of the metal sink, trying to steady her breathing, trying to push down the panic that threatened to consume her. He looked right at me. Right through me. What if he knows? What if he can sense? Stop it, she whispered to herself, the words barely audible even in the empty kitchen. You're being paranoid. He doesn't know anything. He can't. But even as she said it, she knew something fundamental had shifted. For 8 years, she'd been a shadow, a non-entity that people looked through rather than at. The Alpha King had seen her, really seen her, and that terrified her more than anything. She needed air. The kitchen suddenly felt suffocating, the stone walls closing in like a trap. Luna slipped out through the back entrance that led to the herb garden, hoping the cool night air would calm her racing heart. The garden was small but carefully tended, filled with the medicinal plants the pack healer used for various remedies. Luna had always found peace here among the lavender and chamomile, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. She sank onto a worn wooden bench tucked between 2 large rosemary bushes, finally allowing herself to breathe. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in silver light. In 3 days, it would be complete, and the entire pack would shift and run together. Luna would spend that night locked in her small room, as she had for every full moon for the past 8 years, fighting against every instinct that screamed at her to let go, to transform, to be what she truly was. Why couldn't you just leave me alone? She whispered to the moon, tears beginning to spill down her cheeks. I was surviving. I was safe. Why did he have to look at me like that? The words hung in the night air, her voice rusty from disuse but still carrying the melodic quality that had once gotten her into so much trouble. Luna pressed her hands to her mouth, horrified that she'd spoken aloud, even here in the supposed safety of solitude. Like what? The deep, resonant voice came from directly behind her, and Luna's blood turned to ice in her veins. She spun around on the bench, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it, and found herself staring up into the golden eyes that had haunted her since that moment in the great hall. The Alpha King stepped out of the shadows between the garden's entrance archway, his massive frame blocking her only exit. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a mixture of surprise, curiosity, and something that looked almost like hunger. You can speak, he said, and it wasn't a question. His voice was softer now, barely above a whisper, as if he was afraid she might bolt if he spoke too loudly. All these years, you've been pretending. Luna's mouth opened and closed silently, her carefully constructed world crashing down around her. Every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to run, but her legs felt like water, and besides, where could she possibly go that an Alpha King couldn't follow? Please, she finally managed, the word barely audible. It was the first time she'd spoken directly to another person in 8 years, and her voice cracked with the weight of all that suppressed communication. Please don't. Don't what? Kai took a step closer, his movements slow and careful, like he was approaching a wounded animal. Don't tell anyone. Don't ask why you've been living a lie. It's not a lie, Luna said desperately, finding her voice growing stronger with each word, though it still held that musical quality that made Kai's chest tighten with recognition. It's survival. It's the only way I can. She cut herself off, realizing she was saying too much, revealing too much. But it was too late. The dam had cracked, and 8 years of enforced silence couldn't be rebuilt in a single moment. Kai's eyes never left her face as he moved closer, until he was standing directly in front of the bench where she sat. This close, she could smell his scent, pine and leather and something indefinably masculine that made her wolf stir restlessly beneath her skin. The only way you can what, Luna? Her name on his lips sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool night air. What are you so afraid of? The question hung between them like a bridge neither of them was sure they should cross. Luna stared up at him, this powerful man who could destroy her with a single word to the wrong person, and saw something in his expression that she'd never expected to find in someone so dominant. Gentleness. Everything, she whispered, and the single word contained the weight of 8 years of fear, loneliness, and desperate survival. I'm afraid of everything. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other in the moonlit garden, predator and prey caught in a moment of perfect, terrifying honesty. The silence stretched between them, but it was different from the silence Luna had wrapped around herself for so long. This silence hummed with possibility, with the electric awareness that everything was about to change. Kai reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement so she could pull away if she wanted to. When she didn't move, he gently touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she didn't even realize had fallen. "You don't have to be afraid of me," he said softly, and Luna's heart clenched at the sincerity in his voice. "I won't hurt you, Luna. I promise." But even as the words left his mouth, they both knew that some kinds of hurt were inevitable when two broken souls found each other in the darkness. The moment stretched between them like a taut wire, Kai's thumb still brushing against Luna's cheek, her green eyes wide with a mixture of terror and something else, something that looked dangerously like hope. But hope was a luxury Luna had learned to kill before it could kill her. She jerked backward, nearly falling off the bench in her haste to escape his touch. "No," she gasped, scrambling to her feet. "No, this can't, I have to go." "Luna, wait," Kai stepped forward instinctively, but stopped when she flinched away from him like he'd struck her. The hurt that flashed across his features was quickly masked by confusion. "I told you I won't hurt you." "You don't understand," Luna wrapped her arms around herself, as if she could physically hold herself together. "You can't understand. This was a mistake. I shouldn't have." She pressed her lips together, as if she could stuff the words back inside, return to the safety of silence. But it was too late for that, and they both knew it. "What I understand," Kai said carefully, his voice pitched low and soothing, "is that you've been carrying something alone for 8 years. Whatever made you choose silence over speech, whatever you're running from." "I'm not running from anything," Luna lied, her voice gaining strength even as her body language screamed the opposite. "I'm exactly where I need to be, doing exactly what I need to do. And what I need to do is forget this conversation ever happened." She started toward the garden's exit, but Kai moved to block her path without seeming threatening about it. Years of being an alpha had taught him how to use his size and presence strategically, and right now, every instinct he possessed was telling him that if he let her walk away, he'd never get another chance to understand the mystery she represented. "You're lying," he said simply. "To me and to yourself." Luna's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You don't know me. You don't know anything about me or my life or what I've had to." She cut herself off again, furious at how easily he'd gotten her to reveal herself. 8 years of perfect control, shattered by a few gentle words and a touch that felt like coming home. "Then tell me," Kai said, taking a small step closer. "Help me understand." "No." The word came out sharp, final. "Some things are better left buried, Your Majesty. Some secrets exist for good reason." The formal title felt like a slap, and Kai's jaw tightened. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't put that wall back up between us. Not after what just happened here." Luna laughed, but the sound held no humor. "What happened here was a moment of weakness. Nothing more. Tomorrow, I'll go back to the kitchens, you'll go back to ruling your kingdom, and we'll both pretend this never occurred." "Will we?" Kai's eyes flashed with something that made Luna's wolf stir restlessly beneath her skin. "Because I don't think I can pretend I didn't hear the pain in your voice when you said you were afraid of everything. I don't think I can pretend I didn't see the way you looked at me like I was some kind of salvation." "Then that's your problem," Luna shot back, desperation making her cruel. "I didn't ask you to save me, Alpha King. I didn't ask you to notice me at all." The words hung in the air between them, harsh and cutting. Kai felt them like physical blows, but beneath the sting was a recognition of what Luna was really doing, lashing out because she was terrified, putting up walls because vulnerability felt too dangerous. He'd done the same thing himself more times than he could count. "No," he said quietly, "you didn't ask. But that doesn't mean I can walk away now." "You have to." Luna's voice cracked on the words. "You have to walk away, forget this happened, and let me disappear back into the shadows where I belong." "What if I don't want to?" The question was barely a whisper, but it hit Luna like a thunderclap. For a moment, her carefully constructed armor slipped, and Kai saw the raw longing in her eyes, the desperate wish for connection warring with the bone-deep fear that had kept her isolated for nearly a decade. "It doesn't matter what you want," she said finally, her voice hollow. "It doesn't matter what either of us wants. Some things are impossible, and this, whatever this is one of them." "Why?" The single word carried all of Kai's frustration, his confusion, his growing need to understand this woman who had somehow managed to intrigue him more in 10 minutes than anyone had in years. Luna stared at him for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was soft but filled with a sadness that cut straight through him. "Because alpha kings don't fall for broken kitchen servants who've built their entire existence on a lie. And broken kitchen servants don't get fairy tale endings with powerful men who could destroy them with a word." Before Kai could respond, before he could tell her how wrong she was about what he wanted, about what he was feeling, Luna ducked around him and fled toward the pack house. Her feet made no sound on the garden path. She was a ghost again, disappearing into the shadows like she'd never existed at all. Kai stood alone in the moonlit garden, his hands clenched at his sides, replaying every word of their conversation. Her fear was palpable, real, and rooted in something far deeper than simple shyness or social anxiety. Someone had hurt her, badly enough that 8 years later, she still couldn't imagine anyone wanting to protect rather than claim her. The alpha in him demanded he follow, corner her, force her to explain until he understood every scar on her soul. But the man in him, the part that recognized a kindred spirit when he saw one, knew that pushing would only drive her further away. Besides, there was something she'd said that stuck with him: alpha kings don't fall for broken kitchen servants. The problem was, he was beginning to suspect it was already too late for that particular warning. Luna didn't stop running until she reached her small room in the servants' quarters, a tiny space barely large enough for a narrow bed and a single dresser. Her hands shook as she locked the door behind her, though she knew a flimsy metal latch wouldn't keep out an alpha king if he decided to pursue her. But he wouldn't. He couldn't. What had happened in the garden was an aberration, a moment of curiosity that would fade once he remembered who and what she was. Tomorrow, he would wake up and realize how close he'd come to making a terrible mistake, and he would be grateful that she'd had the sense to run. She sank onto the edge of her bed, pressing her palms against her eyes as if she could block out the memory of gentle golden eyes and a touch that had made her feel human for the first time in 8 years. "You're being ridiculous," she told herself firmly. "He's the alpha king. You're nobody." This was never going to end any way but badly. But even as she tried to convince herself that running had been the right choice, she couldn't forget the look on his face when she'd flinched away from him. He'd looked hurt, as if her rejection had actually mattered to him. "Impossible," she whispered to the empty room. "It's impossible." But deep in her chest, in the place where she'd buried every hope and dream years ago, something stirred to life. Something dangerous and warm and utterly terrifying. Something that felt suspiciously like hope. Have you ever had to choose between safety and the possibility of something beautiful? What do you think Luna should do? Keep running or trust that maybe, just maybe, this alpha king is different from the rest? Let me know in the comments. Luna managed to avoid the alpha king for exactly 18 hours. She rose before dawn, as was her habit, and threw herself into kitchen duties with an intensity that had the other servants giving her worried glances. She scrubbed pots until her knuckles bled, kneaded bread dough with enough force to pulverize stone, and kept her eyes firmly fixed on whatever task was in front of her. It almost worked. Almost. But then Marcus, the head cook, appeared at her elbow with an expression that made her stomach drop to her feet. "Luna," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "You're wanted in the Alpha's private dining room. Immediately." The wooden spoon in her hand snapped in half. Around the kitchen, conversations died as every servant within earshot turned to stare. In 8 years, Luna had never been summoned anywhere by anyone. She was invisible, unremarkable, forgettable. Until now. She started, then remembered she was supposed to be mute. She pressed her lips together and shook her head frantically, pointing to herself with a questioning expression. "Yes, you," Marcus confirmed, though his weathered face showed confusion. "The Alpha King specifically requested the mute kitchen girl. Said you were to bring his afternoon meal and attend to whatever else he might require." The innuendo in those last words wasn't lost on anyone present, and Luna felt heat flood her cheeks. Several of the other servants exchanged knowing looks, the kind that said they thought they understood exactly why the powerful Alpha King had suddenly taken an interest in the strange, silent girl from the kitchens. If only they knew how wrong they were. Luna wanted to run. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to bolt for the door, keep running until she was far from this packhouse, this territory, this man who saw too much and made her feel things she'd sworn never to feel again. But Marcus was still watching her expectantly, and behind him, she could see other servants beginning to whisper among themselves. Running would only confirm whatever sordid theories they were already constructing. And worse, it might prompt questions she couldn't afford to have asked. With hands that trembled only slightly, Luna nodded and began preparing a tray. The Alpha's private dining room was located on the 3rd floor of the packhouse, far from the communal areas where Luna usually worked. She'd never been in this part of the building before, and as she climbed the polished wooden stairs, tray balanced carefully in her hands, she couldn't help but notice how different everything was up here. The floors were rich hardwood instead of worn stone. The walls were lined with beautiful tapestries and artwork instead of bare functional surfaces. Even the air smelled different, less like cooking food and cleaning supplies, more like expensive leather and wood polish. This was where the important people lived. The people who mattered. The people who were nothing like her. Luna paused outside the dining room door, gathering her courage. She could do this. She would deliver the food, nod politely at whatever instructions he gave her, and return to the kitchens. She would not speak. She would not meet his eyes. She would certainly not think about the way his thumb had felt against her cheek or the gentleness in his voice when he'd promised not to hurt her. She knocked softly and waited for permission to enter. "Come in." His voice sent an unwelcome shiver down her spine, but Luna pushed the reaction aside and stepped into the room. It was smaller than she'd expected, more intimate, with a single table set near tall windows that looked out over the packlands. Kai sat at the head of the table, still wearing the formal clothes from last night's gathering, though his jacket was draped over the back of his chair and his shirt sleeves were rolled up to reveal strong forearms. He looked tired, Luna realized. There were shadows under his golden eyes, and his dark hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it. "Thank you," he said as she approached to set down the tray. His voice was carefully polite, giving no indication of their encounter in the garden. "That will be all." Luna blinked in surprise. She'd been prepared for interrogation, for demands, for him to use his authority to force her into conversation. Instead, he was dismissing her as if she truly were nothing more than a servant delivering a meal. She should have been relieved. Instead, she felt oddly disappointed. Luna turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. "Actually, there is one more thing." She turned back to find him watching her with an unreadable expression. "I received some disturbing reports this morning. It seems there may be rogue wolves in the area, wolves who don't respect pack boundaries or the laws that govern our kind." Luna's blood turned to ice. Rogues were dangerous, unpredictable. They were wolves who had been exiled from their packs or who had chosen to live outside the structure and protection that pack life provided. They followed no laws, acknowledged no authority, and took whatever they wanted from whoever was too weak to stop them, including lone females who had no pack protection. "Until the threat is neutralized," Kai continued, still watching her face carefully, "I've decided that all unmated females in this pack will be assigned personal protection. You'll be staying in the guest quarters on this floor, where the guards can keep a better eye on you." "No." The word screamed through Luna's mind, though she managed to keep it from escaping her lips. Being moved to this floor, being under constant watch, it would make it impossible to maintain her carefully constructed invisibility. And worse, it would put her in constant proximity to the one person who had already seen too much, who threatened everything she'd built to survive. She shook her head emphatically, gesturing toward the servants' quarters downstairs. I'm afraid it's not a request, Kai said, his tone shifting to carry the unmistakable weight of an alpha's command. Your safety is my responsibility, and I take that responsibility very seriously. Especially for pack members who might be particularly vulnerable. The emphasis on those last words made it clear he was talking about more than just her supposed muteness. Luna felt trapped, caught between the very real danger of rogues and the equally real danger of spending more time around a man who made her want things she couldn't have. Your room is 3 doors down the hall, Kai added, returning his attention to his meal as if the matter was settled. Your belongings have already been moved. A guard will escort you when you need to work in the kitchens, and you're not to go anywhere alone until I say otherwise. Luna stood frozen in the doorway, her mind racing. This was a disaster. How was she supposed to maintain her facade when she was under constant observation? How was she supposed to avoid him when they were living on the same floor? Is there a problem? Kai's voice was deceptively mild, but Luna could hear the steel underneath. He was giving her a choice that wasn't really a choice at all: comply willingly, or be compelled to comply. She shook her head quickly and fled the room before he could say anything else that would make this situation even more impossible than it already was. The guest room was beautiful and comfortable and absolutely terrifying. It was easily 3 times the size of her servants' quarters, with a real bed instead of a narrow cot, a private bathroom, and windows that actually let in natural light. Her few possessions looked lost in the space, like they belonged to someone else entirely. Someone who mattered. Luna sank onto the edge of the bed, trying to process this new reality. She was trapped, not just in this room, but in a web of circumstances that was tightening around her with every passing hour. The rogue threat was real. She could smell the tension in the air, could see it in the way the guards moved through the hallways with increased alertness. But she couldn't shake the feeling that Kai's decision to move her had less to do with general pack safety and more to do with their encounter in the garden. A soft knock at her door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Luna opened it to find a young woman about her own age standing in the hallway, wearing the uniform of the packhouse staff. "Hi," the woman said with a friendly smile. "I'm Sarah, one of the upper-floor attendants. The Alpha King asked me to show you around. Make sure you have everything you need." Luna nodded politely, but inwardly she was screaming. More people to interact with. More chances for her carefully maintained silence to slip. More opportunities for someone to notice that she wasn't quite what she seemed. "He also asked me to let you know that dinner will be served in his private dining room at 7, Sarah continued. "You're expected to join him." This time, Luna couldn't hide her shock. Her eyes went wide, and she took an involuntary step backward. "Don't worry," Sarah said, misinterpreting her reaction. "I know it seems intimidating, but he's not as scary as everyone thinks. A little lonely, maybe, but not scary." Lonely. The word echoed in Luna's mind as Sarah chatted about schedules and protocols. Yes, she could see that about him. There had been something in his eyes last night, a kind of isolation that she recognized because she felt it herself. But loneliness was a luxury she couldn't afford to sympathize with. Not when her very survival depended on maintaining the walls between them. As Sarah finally left her alone, Luna realized with growing dread that those walls were about to be tested in ways she'd never prepared for. 7 o'clock was still hours away, but already she could feel her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. 7 o'clock arrived with the inevitability of a death sentence. Luna stood outside the dining room door for the second time that day, but everything felt different now. This time, she wore a simple dress that Sarah had brought her, nothing fancy, but clean and well-fitted, making her feel exposed in a way her kitchen uniforms never had. This time, she wasn't carrying a tray of food to deliver and retreat. This time, she was expected to stay, to sit, to eat, to pretend she belonged in this world of polished surfaces and quiet luxury. To somehow maintain her silence while sharing an intimate meal with a man who had already heard her speak. Luna raised her hand to knock, then let it fall. Raised it again. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. "You could still run," the voice in her head whispered. "There's a window at the end of the hall. You could shift, jump, be gone before anyone notices." But where would she go? And for how long could she keep running before the rogues found her, or worse, before she ran into wolves who knew what she really was, where she'd come from, why she'd learned to fear her own voice? "Luna." Kai's voice came from behind the door, and she realized he must have heard her approach, maybe even sensed her internal struggle. "Come in. Please." The word please undid something in her chest. Alpha Kings didn't say please to kitchen servants. They commanded, demanded, took what they wanted without asking. But Kai had said please, and somehow that small courtesy made it impossible to keep running. Luna opened the door and stepped inside. The dining room had been transformed. The formal table from earlier was gone, replaced by a smaller, more intimate setting near the windows. Candles flickered softly, casting warm light that made the space feel less like a throne room and more like home. Kai stood when she entered, another small courtesy that made her feel simultaneously treasured and terrified. He'd changed clothes. Gone was the formal attire from the gathering, replaced by simple dark pants and a soft sweater that made him look less like an untouchable king and more like a man. A devastatingly attractive man who was looking at her like she was something precious. "Thank you for coming," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "I know this must be difficult." Luna nodded stiffly and took the offered seat, hyper-aware of how close he was, how his scent wrapped around her like a warm embrace. When he moved to his own chair across from her, she felt both relieved and disappointed by the increased distance. For several minutes, they ate in silence. The food was delicious, far better than anything served in the communal dining areas, but Luna could barely taste it. She was too focused on maintaining her composure, on keeping her hand steady, on not looking directly at the man who seemed to fill her peripheral vision no matter where she tried to focus her attention. "You're afraid of me," Kai said finally, his voice soft but matter-of-fact. Luna's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She forced herself to meet his eyes and shook her head, though they both knew it was a lie. "Not of me, then," he corrected. "Of this. Of being here, of being seen." His golden eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her want to hide. "Of being known." This time, Luna couldn't deny it. She set down her fork and nodded once, a sharp, reluctant admission. "I understand," Kai said, and something in his voice made her look at him more carefully. "I've spent most of my life afraid of the same thing." The confession surprised her. Alpha Kings weren't supposed to be afraid of anything, least of all being known. They were supposed to be untouchable, invulnerable, completely self-sufficient. "It's easier, isn't it?" he continued, his gaze fixed on the candle flame between them. "To keep everyone at a distance. To let them see only what you want them to see. To never risk letting anyone close enough to hurt you." Luna's breath caught in her throat. He was describing her life with painful accuracy, but he was also describing his own, and suddenly she saw him not as the powerful, untouchable Alpha King, but as someone who understood loneliness in a way few people could. "The problem," Kai said, finally meeting her eyes again, "is that isolation becomes its own kind of prison after a while. And I think you've been in that prison even longer than I have." For a moment, Luna forgot to breathe. He saw her, really saw her, in a way no one had in 8 years. The recognition in his eyes was both terrifying and intoxicating. "I won't force you to talk," he said gently. "But I want you to know that you can. Here with me. Whatever you're carrying, whatever you're running from, you don't have to carry it alone anymore." The kindness in his voice nearly broke her. Luna pressed her lips together, fighting against the words that wanted to spill out, the confession that had been building behind her teeth for 8 years. But then she saw the way the candlelight caught the strong line of his jaw, the way his hands rested on the table, hands that could command armies but had touched her cheek with infinite gentleness. And maybe it was the wine she'd barely touched, or maybe it was the exhaustion of carrying her secrets alone for so long, but something inside her cracked. I had a voice once, she whispered, the words so soft they were almost lost in the space between them. Before I learned that voices could be dangerous things. Kai went very still, as if afraid that any movement might spook her back into silence. I was 20, Luna continued, her voice gaining strength even as her hands began to tremble. Young and stupid, and so sure that love was supposed to conquer everything. She laughed, but the sound was bitter. I believed in fairy tales then. What happened? Kai's voice was barely audible, but she heard the careful control in it, the way he was holding back his alpha instincts to demand answers. Luna closed her eyes, letting herself remember for the first time in years. There was a wolf. Older, powerful, from a prominent family. He said he loved me, said he wanted to make me his mate. Her hands clenched into fists in her lap. What he really wanted was to own me. To break me. To turn me into the perfect, silent, obedient Luna he could control. Kai's scent sharpened with anger, but he remained silent, letting her speak. When I tried to leave him, when I finally realized what he really was. Luna opened her eyes and looked directly at Kai, letting him see the old pain that still lived in her chest. He told me that if I ever used my voice to defy him again, to call for help, to tell anyone what he'd done to me, he would make sure I never spoke another word. Permanently. The silence that followed her confession was deafening. Luna watched Kai's face carefully, waiting for the pity she couldn't bear to see, or worse, the calculation of whether she was worth the trouble her past might bring. Instead, she saw a rage so pure and controlled it took her breath away. What was his name? Kai's voice was deadly quiet, carrying the full weight of his authority as Alpha King. It doesn't matter, Luna said quickly. He can't hurt me anymore. I made sure of that when I disappeared, when I became invisible, when I chose silence over the risk of being found. It matters to me. Each word was carefully enunciated, like Kai was fighting to keep his wolf from taking control. No one threatens what's mine and gets away with it. The possessive words should have terrified her. Instead, they sent a warm rush through her chest that she tried desperately to ignore. I'm not yours, she said, but even she could hear how unconvincing the words sounded. Kai leaned forward, his golden eyes intense in the candlelight. Aren't you? Because the moment I heard your voice in that garden, the moment I saw the pain you've been carrying alone, something in me recognized something in you. Something that says you were meant to be here in this room, trusting me with secrets you've never told another soul. Luna stared at him, her heart racing. You don't understand what you're saying. What it would mean. The danger. Let me worry about the danger, Kai said firmly. You've been protecting yourself alone for 8 years, Luna. Don't you think it's time to let someone else share that burden? For a moment, she could almost believe it was possible. That she could set down the weight she'd been carrying, that she could trust this powerful gentle man with not just her secrets but her heart. But fairy tales were for other people. And she'd learned that lesson too well to forget it now. Some burdens are too heavy to share, she whispered, and saw something in Kai's eyes dim at her words. But he didn't push. Instead, he reached across the table and covered her hand with his touch warm and steady and patient. We'll see, he said simply, and Luna felt her carefully constructed world shift once again on its axis. The next 3 days passed like a dream Luna was afraid to wake from. True to his word, Kai didn't push. He didn't demand more confessions or try to force her into conversations she wasn't ready for. Instead, he simply existed in her space with a patience that was both comforting and utterly foreign to her experience. Their meals together became a routine. Breakfast in comfortable silence, lunch with gentle observations about pack business or the weather, dinner with increasingly personal conversations that never strayed into territory that made her retreat into herself. He told her about his childhood, about the weight of inheriting a crown he'd never wanted, about the loneliness of being surrounded by people who saw his title before they saw him. In return, Luna found herself sharing small pieces of her own story. Not the dark parts, those remained locked away, but lighter memories from before. Her love of books, her talent for languages, the way she used to sing while she worked before silence became her shield. "You have a beautiful voice," Kai said on the third evening, after she'd unconsciously hummed a melody while they ate. "Even just humming, it's extraordinary." Luna's hand flew to her throat, her eyes wide with panic. She hadn't even realized she was making sound. "Hey." Kai's voice was immediately soothing. "It's okay. There's nothing wrong with having a voice, Luna. There's nothing wrong with using it." "You don't understand," she whispered, her old fears surging back. "Voices draw attention. Attention brings danger." "Not here," Kai said firmly. "Not with me. I promise you that." The certainty in his voice made something tight in her chest begin to loosen, just a little. It was on the fourth morning that everything changed. Luna was in the small sitting area attached to her room, curled up in a chair by the window with one of the books Kai had brought her from his personal library. The morning sun streamed through the glass, warm and golden, and for the first time in years, she felt something approaching peace. The scream shattered that peace like glass. Luna was on her feet instantly, the book tumbling to the floor as her enhanced hearing picked up the sounds of conflict from somewhere in the pack house below. Shouting, the crash of furniture, the unmistakable sound of wolves in combat. The rogues. They'd found a way inside. Her first instinct was to hide, to make herself as small and invisible as possible until the danger passed. It was what she'd been doing for 8 years, and it had kept her alive. But then she heard another sound that stopped her heart cold. Kai's voice, raised in command, coming from the direction of the main hall. He was down there in the middle of the fight, and even though she knew he was powerful, knew he could handle himself, terror still clawed at her chest. Luna ran from her room without thinking, her bare feet silent on the polished floors as she raced toward the sounds of battle. She had no plan, no idea what she could possibly do to help, but the thought of Kai in danger overrode every survival instinct she possessed. She reached the main staircase just as a massive gray wolf came crashing through the front doors, blood matting its fur, eyes wild with the madness that marked a rogue who had been alone too long. Behind it, she could see Kai in his wolf form, larger, darker, radiating the kind of deadly power that made even other alphas submit. But there were more rogues. Too many. And some of the pack warriors were already down, their human forms crumpled and bleeding on the marble floor. Luna watched in horror as one of the rogues, a scarred female with hatred burning in her yellow eyes, circled around behind Kai while he was focused on the gray male. She was positioning herself for a killing strike, claws extended, muscles bunched for the leap that would tear out his throat. "Kai, behind you." The words tore from Luna's throat before she could stop them, her voice carrying clearly across the chaos of battle. Kai spun instantly, catching the female rogue mid-leap and bringing her down hard. The gray male, distracted by Luna's shout, left himself open for the split second Kai needed to end the fight with swift, brutal efficiency. The silence that followed was deafening. Luna stood frozen on the stairs, one hand pressed to her mouth in horror, not at the violence she'd witnessed, but at what she'd just done. She'd used her voice. She'd drawn attention to herself. She'd broken the most fundamental rule of her survival. Kai shifted back to human form, gloriously naked and utterly unconcerned about it as his golden eyes found hers across the blood-stained hall. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, and Luna saw the exact moment he understood what her warning had cost her. "Luna," he said softly, and her name on his lips held a world of understanding. Then pack members began arriving from all directions. Warriors drawn by the sounds of battle, servants emerging from hiding, the pack doctor rushing to tend the wounded. Within minutes, the hall was full of people, all of them looking between their Alpha King and the woman on the stairs who had somehow been central to the fight's resolution. The woman who was supposed to be mute. Luna felt the weight of dozens of stares, heard the whispered questions beginning to ripple through the crowd, and panic seized her throat like a physical thing. She turned and fled, racing back up the stairs toward the questionable safety of her room. She almost made it. "Luna, wait." Kai's voice stopped her at the top of the stairs. She turned to find him there, having followed her with a silent speed that only came from years of being a predator. He'd grabbed a robe from somewhere and tied it loosely around his waist, but his attention was entirely focused on her face. "I'm sorry," she gasped, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I couldn't let her hurt you, I couldn't just watch." "Thank you," Kai said simply, cutting off her panicked apology. "You saved my life." Luna stared at him, confusion replacing panic. "But I spoke. In front of everyone. They'll ask questions, they'll want to know." "Let them ask," Kai said, taking a step closer. "Let them wonder. What matters is that you trusted me enough to break your own rules to keep me safe." The simple gratitude in his voice, the way he was looking at her like she'd given him something precious instead of creating a problem, made tears spring to her eyes. "I was so scared," she whispered, and she wasn't talking about the rogues anymore. "I know," Kai said gently. He reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and when she didn't, he cupped her face in his hands. His thumbs brushed away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "But you did it anyway. You were brave anyway." "I'm not brave," Luna protested. "Brave people don't spend 8 years hiding from their own shadows." "Brave people do whatever it takes to survive," Kai corrected. "And then when someone they care about is in danger, they risk everything to protect them." His golden eyes searched hers. "That's exactly what you did." "Someone they care about." The words settled into Luna's chest like seeds taking root in fertile soil. When was the last time someone had cared enough about her to risk anything? When was the last time she'd cared enough about someone else to risk everything? "Kai," she started, but he shook his head. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "You've already said everything that matters." But Luna realized she wanted to say more. For the first time in 8 years, she wanted to use her voice not just to warn or protect, but to reach out. To connect. "I was terrified that she was going to kill you," she said softly. "The thought of losing you before I even really had you, it was unbearable." Kai's hands tightened on her face, and she saw something fierce and possessive flash in his eyes. "You have me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "However much of me you want, however much you can handle, it's yours." Luna felt something inside her chest unfurl like a flower turning toward the sun. It was terrifying and wonderful and completely foreign, this feeling of being wanted, of being chosen, of mattering enough that someone would offer themselves completely. "What if I'm too broken?" she whispered. "What if I can't be what you need?" "Then we'll be broken together," Kai said simply. "And maybe we'll figure out how to heal each other." The kiss that followed was soft and gentle and tasted like hope. Luna had forgotten what hope felt like, had convinced herself she was better off without it. But as Kai's lips moved against hers with infinite patience and tenderness, she thought maybe, just maybe, some risks were worth taking. Even for someone who had spent 8 years believing that safety was more important than love. When they broke apart, Luna rested her forehead against his and whispered the words that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "I think I'm falling in love with you." Kai's smile was radiant. "Good," he said, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "Because I fell for you the moment I heard you whisper my name in that garden." For exactly 6 hours, Luna allowed herself to believe in fairy tales again. After the rogue attack, after that perfect first kiss, after Kai's promise that they could heal each other, she let herself imagine a future where she didn't have to hide. Where she could wake up every morning in strong arms that made her feel safe instead of trapped. Where her voice could be a gift instead of a weapon turned against her. For 6 hours, she was just a woman falling in love with a man who saw her scars and called them beautiful. Then Marcus found her. Luna was in the garden where she'd first been discovered, sitting on the same bench where Kai had wiped away her tears. The afternoon sun was warm on her face, and she was actually humming, not unconsciously this time, but deliberately, reveling in the freedom to make sound without fear. She should have heard him coming. Should have sensed the danger before it was too late. But love had made her careless, and happiness had dulled the survival instincts that had kept her alive for 8 years. "Well, well," a familiar voice drawled behind her, and Luna's blood turned to ice. If it isn't little Luna, singing like a bird after all these years. She spun around, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. There, standing in the garden's entrance like a nightmare made flesh, was the wolf who had driven her into 8 years of silence. Marcus Blackwood looked exactly as she remembered, tall, dark, devastatingly handsome in the way that predators often were. His smile was the same too, charming on the surface, cruel underneath, the expression of someone who enjoyed causing pain. "Miss me, darling?" he asked, taking a step closer. Luna scrambled backward, nearly falling off the bench in her haste to put distance between them. "What, how did you?" she stammered, her voice cracking with terror. "Find you?" Marcus laughed, and the sound made her skin crawl. "Oh, Luna. Did you really think you could hide forever? Especially once you started making noise again." His eyes glittered with malice. "Imagine my surprise when word reached me that the Shadow Moon Pack's mute kitchen servant had suddenly found her voice to save the Alpha King's life. Such a distinctive voice, too. I'd recognize it anywhere." Luna felt the world tilting around her. The rogue attack, her moment of choice, her decision to trust love over fear, had been her downfall. By saving Kai, she'd exposed herself to the very danger she'd been running from. "Please," she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. "I never told anyone about you. I kept your secrets. I disappeared like you wanted." "And yet here you are," Marcus said, his tone conversational as he moved closer, living in the Alpha King's personal quarters, sharing meals with him, kissing him in the hallways where anyone could see. His expression darkened. "Did you really think I wouldn't hear about that?" Luna's throat closed with terror. How did he know about the kiss? How long had he been watching? "You broke our agreement, Luna," Marcus continued, his voice dropping to the silky tone she remembered from her nightmares. "You were supposed to stay silent. Stay hidden. Stay worthless. Instead, you've been playing house with the most powerful alpha in the territories." "It's not like that," Luna protested desperately. "I never meant." "Of course it's like that," Marcus snarled, his civilized mask finally slipping. "You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know you've been spreading your legs for him, using that sweet little voice to wrap him around your finger?" The crude words hit Luna like physical blows. She wanted to deny them, wanted to explain that what she had with Kai was nothing like the twisted thing Marcus had tried to force on her, but terror had stolen her ability to form coherent sentences. 8 years, Marcus said, shaking his head in mock disappointment. 8 years I let you live because you kept your mouth shut and stayed in your place. But now you've gotten ideas above your station, haven't you? Started thinking you could be something more than the damaged goods you've always been. "Stop," Luna whispered, tears streaming down her face. "The truth hurts, doesn't it, darling?" Marcus smiled that cruel smile again. "But don't worry. I'm here to remind you exactly what you are. And more importantly, what you're not." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device that Luna recognized with growing horror, a voice recorder, the kind used for official pack business. "A little insurance policy," Marcus explained, pressing play. Luna's own voice filled the garden, clear and desperate. "It doesn't matter. He can't hurt me anymore. I made sure of that when I disappeared, when I became invisible, when I chose silence over the risk of being found." Her confession from the dinner with Kai, somehow recorded, somehow stolen. "Fascinating listening," Marcus mused. "Especially the part where you admit to lying about your identity, falsifying pack records, living under false pretenses for 8 years. He tilted his head. "Do you know what the penalty is for deceiving an Alpha King, Luna? For making him look like a fool in front of his people?" Luna couldn't breathe. The recording was damning, not just her words, but the context that made it clear she'd been deliberately hiding from something. Anyone hearing it would assume the worst, and in the supernatural community, assumptions could be deadly. "What do you want?" she managed to ask. "What I've always wanted," Marcus said simply. "You. Back where you belong. Under my control, in my pack, bound to me as you should have been 8 years ago." "Never," Luna said, finding strength she didn't know she still possessed. "I'll never go back to that." Marcus laughed. "Oh, but you will. Because if you don't, I'll make sure this recording reaches not just the Alpha King, but every pack leader in the territories. I'll tell them exactly who you are, what you've done, what you're running from." His smile turned vicious. "And I'll make sure they know that their precious Alpha King has been harboring a fugitive who's been lying to him from the moment they met." The threat hit Luna like a physical blow. It wasn't just her own destruction he was promising, it was Kai's humiliation, his political ruin. An Alpha King who could be deceived so completely would be seen as weak, vulnerable. His enemies would use it against him, his allies would question his judgment. She could survive her own downfall. She'd been expecting it for 8 years. But she couldn't survive being the cause of Kai's. "You have 24 hours, Marcus said, tucking the recorder back into his jacket. "Meet me at the old mill on the territory's border tomorrow at midnight. Come alone and come willing, and maybe, I'll let your king keep his dignity." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But if you try to run, if you tell him about our little chat, if you do anything other than exactly what I've told you to do." He didn't need to finish the threat. They both knew what he was capable of. Marcus straightened his jacket and smiled that charming, horrible smile one more time. "It's so good to see you again, darling. I've missed our conversations." Then he was gone, disappearing into the packhouse corridors like he'd never been there at all, leaving Luna alone with the wreckage of her newfound happiness. She sat on the bench for a long time after he left, staring at the spot where he'd stood, feeling everything inside her crumble to ash. The sun was setting, painting the garden in shades of gold and amber that reminded her painfully of Kai's eyes. "I have to leave," she thought numbly. "I have to go to him, and I have to protect him the only way I can." But first, she had to face the hardest part of all. She had to say goodbye. Luna found Kai in his study, standing at the same windows where she'd first seen him looking out over his territory. He turned when she entered, and his face lit up with a kind of smile that had been making her heart race for days. "There you are," he said warmly. "I was starting to worry." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw her face. The smile faded, replaced by immediate concern. "Luna? What's wrong?" For a moment, she couldn't speak. Couldn't bear to destroy the love she saw in his golden eyes. But Marcus's threat echoed in her mind, and she forced herself to remember what was at stake. "I can't do this," she said, the words cutting her throat like glass on the way out. "Can't do what?" "This. Us." Luna wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold the pieces together long enough to finish what she'd started. "I thought I could, but I was wrong. I'm too damaged, too broken. You deserve better." Kai crossed the room in 3 quick strides, reaching for her, but Luna stepped backward, shaking her head. "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't touch me. It only makes this harder." "Makes what harder?" Kai's voice was strained, confused. "Luna, what happened? This morning you were happy, you were." "This morning I was pretending," Luna said, hating herself for the lie, hating how it made his face crumble. "Just like I've been pretending all along. You said it yourself, I'm good at living lies." "That's not what I meant, and you know it." Kai's hands clenched at his sides. "Something happened. Someone said something to you. Tell me what's wrong, and we'll fix it together." The desperate hope in his voice nearly broke her resolve. Luna closed her eyes, summoning every ounce of strength she had left. "Some things can't be fixed, Kai," she said softly. "Some people are too broken to be worth the effort." When she opened her eyes, she saw the exact moment her words hit him. Saw the love in his expression fracture into hurt, confusion, and something that looked dangerously like heartbreak. "You don't mean that," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I do," Luna whispered, and turned away before she could see any more damage she'd caused. She made it to the door before his voice stopped her one last time. "Luna." She paused but didn't turn around. "I don't know what happened, what someone said or did to make you believe you don't deserve happiness. But if you ever figure out that you're wrong, that you're worth everything, not despite your scars but because of your strength, you know where to find me." Luna bit her lip hard enough to taste blood, fighting the urge to run back to him, to tell him the truth, to let him fight her battles like he'd promised. Instead, she walked out of his study, out of his life, carrying his heart and her own in pieces. The old mill stood at the edge of Shadow Moon territory, like a monument to abandonment. Luna arrived 15 minutes early, her small bag clutched in trembling hands, every shadow making her flinch with the expectation of seeing Marcus's cruel smile. She'd spent the day in her room, packing the few belongings that mattered, trying to memorize the feel of safety she'd known for such a brief, precious time. Every sound in the hallway had made her heart race, hoping and dreading that it might be Kai coming to demand answers she couldn't give. But he'd respected her cruel dismissal, had given her the space she'd asked for, even though she could see through her window that lights had burned in his study all night. Even now, some part of her foolish heart hoped he might appear, might have found some way to fix the unfixable. But this wasn't a fairy tale, and Alpha Kings didn't save women who were too cowardly to save themselves. "You came." Marcus's voice drifted from the mill's entrance, and Luna turned to see him emerge from the shadows. He looked pleased, satisfied, like a cat who'd finally cornered a particularly elusive mouse. "I wasn't entirely sure you would." "I keep my word," Luna said quietly, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Unlike some promises, Marcus smiled that cold smile. "Did you enjoy your little fantasy while it lasted? Playing house with the Alpha King, pretending you could ever be more than what you are?" Luna didn't answer. There was no point in rising to his bait, not when she was about to give him everything he wanted anyway. "Where are we going?" she asked instead. "My territory, of course. I have a lovely little cabin prepared for you, very isolated, very quiet. You'll be comfortable there." His eyes glittered with malice. "Once you remember how to behave properly." The casual threat in his words made her skin crawl, but Luna forced herself to nod. She'd survived him before. She could survive him again. And Kai would be safe, that was what mattered. "Shall we?" Marcus gestured toward the path that led deeper into the woods, away from Shadow Moon Land, away from everything good she'd ever known. Luna took a step forward, then stopped. "You're worth everything, not despite your scars but because of your strength." Kai's words from the night before echoed in her mind, and for the first time since Marcus had appeared in the garden, Luna really listened to them. Not to the pain they caused, but to the truth they contained. Strength. Kai had called her strong. 8 years of surviving on her own. 8 years of building a life from nothing, of protecting herself when no one else would. 8 years of silence, not because she was weak, but because she was smart enough to know when to hide and brave enough to know when to speak. She'd saved Kai's life. She'd chosen love over fear, at least for a moment. She'd let herself be vulnerable with another person for the first time in nearly a decade. That wasn't weakness. That was the strongest thing she'd ever done. Second thoughts. Marcus asked, misinterpreting her hesitation as fear. Luna looked at him, really looked at him. He was still handsome, still powerful, still radiating the kind of authority that had once made her believe she had no choice but to submit. But for the first time, she saw him clearly. He was a bully. A man who could only feel strong by making others feel weak. Someone who had spent 8 years tracking down a woman who had escaped him, not because he loved her, but because he couldn't bear to lose control of something he considered his property. "You know what I realized?" Luna said slowly, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I spent 8 years thinking I was hiding from you. But I wasn't hiding, I was healing. I was growing stronger. I was becoming someone who didn't need your permission to exist. Marcus's expression darkened. Luna. I'm not finished, she said firmly, and there was something in her tone that made him stop talking. The voice of a woman who had finally remembered her own worth. You want me to believe I'm broken, worthless, nothing without you. But if that were true, why have you spent 8 years trying to find me? Why go through all this trouble for someone who's supposedly beneath your notice? Because you belong to me, Marcus snarled, his civilized mask slipping completely. No, Luna said simply. I belong to me. I always have. And I choose not to go with you. The silence that followed her words was electric, dangerous. Marcus took a step toward her, his hands beginning to shift into claws. You don't have a choice, he said, his voice dropping to a growl. The recording will prove that I survived something terrible and built a new life despite it, Luna interrupted. Any alpha worth following will see strength in that story, not weakness. And what about your precious king? Marcus sneered. When everyone knows he was fooled by a lying little, we'll know that he saw past surface deception to the truth underneath, Luna said calmly. That he valued substance over appearance, healing over perfection. They'll respect him more, not less. For the first time since she'd known him, Marcus looked uncertain. The power he'd held over her for so long was crumbling, and they both knew it. You're making a mistake, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Maybe, Luna acknowledged. But it's my mistake to make. My choice. My life. She took a step backward toward home, toward the man who had seen her scars and called them beautiful. And I choose love over fear. Kai was standing in his study, staring out at the territory he'd inherited but never truly felt he owned, when the soft knock came at his door. He'd been there for hours, replaying every moment with Luna, trying to understand where he'd gone wrong. Come in, he called, not bothering to turn around. Probably Devon with pack business he couldn't focus on, or Sarah with questions about household arrangements he couldn't bring himself to care about. I made a choice. The soft voice made him spin around so fast he nearly lost his balance. Luna stood in his doorway, still wearing the simple dress from their dinner, her hair windswept and her green eyes bright with unshed tears. Luna. Her name was a prayer on his lips. I thought you'd left. I was going to, she said quietly, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. I almost did. But then I remembered something you said about being worth everything because of my strength, not despite my scars. Kai's heart hammered in his chest as she moved closer, hope and fear warring in his expression. There are things I need to tell you, Luna continued. True things, this time. About my past, about why I really ran, about the threats that made me push you away. She stopped just out of arm's reach, her voice steady but vulnerable. It's not a pretty story, and it might change how you see me. Never, Kai said immediately. Nothing could change how I see you. Luna smiled, and for the first time since he'd known her, it held no shadows. That's what I'm counting on, she said softly. Because I'm done running. I'm done letting fear make my choices for me. I'm done believing I don't deserve love. Luna. I love you, she said, the words rushing out like water through a broken dam. I love your patience, your gentleness, the way you see strength where I see weakness. I love that you waited for me to find my voice instead of demanding I use it. I love that you make me want to be brave. The smile that spread across Kai's face was radiant, transforming his entire expression. I love you too, he said, closing the distance between them in 2 quick strides. I love your resilience, your courage, the way you saved my life without thinking about the cost. I love that you chose to trust me with your truth. When he cupped her face in his hands, Luna didn't flinch away. When he lowered his head to kiss her, she rose to meet him. And when he whispered against her lips that he would protect her from whatever she was running from, she believed him. Because some choices were worth the risk. And love, Luna had finally learned, was always worth choosing. What's the bravest choice you've ever had to make? Sometimes the biggest risk is not in running away, but in staying to fight for what matters most. Share your thoughts below. Have you ever had to choose between fear and love? 3 months later, Luna stood in the same garden where her world had first shattered and then been reborn, but everything was different now. The roses were in full bloom, their sweet fragrance mixing with the scent of jasmine and honeysuckle. But more than that, she was different, no longer a ghost haunting the edges of life, but a woman who had found her place in the world. And her voice. The education program for unmated females is working better than we hoped, she was saying to Kai, who sat beside her on the bench they'd claimed as their own. 3 more women have enrolled in the literacy classes, and Maria finally agreed to learn basic self-defense. Kai smiled, watching the way Luna's face lit up when she talked about her work. After Marcus had been permanently banished from all pack territories, a decision reached unanimously by the Council of Alpha Kings after Luna had bravely testified about his abuse, she'd thrown herself into helping other women who had suffered similar traumas. "You're changing lives," he said softly, reaching over to take her hand. The simple gold band on her finger caught the sunlight, still new enough to make his heart race every time he saw it. Luna turned to look at her husband. Even 3 weeks after their mating ceremony, the words still sent thrills through her, and felt the familiar flutter of joy that came from being truly seen and loved. "We're changing lives," she corrected. "None of this would be possible without your support, your resources, your willingness to challenge pack traditions that weren't serving anyone." It was true. The Shadow Moon Pack had become a model for progressive policies under Kai's leadership, offering sanctuary to women fleeing abusive situations, education programs for those who'd been denied learning, and counseling services for trauma survivors. Other packs were beginning to follow their example, creating a network of safety that might prevent others from enduring what Luna had. "I had an interesting conversation with Devon today," Kai said, his tone casual but his eyes sparkling with mischief. "Oh." Luna raised an eyebrow, recognizing that particular look. "He mentioned that some of the pack elders have been asking questions about succession. Apparently, they're curious about when the Alpha King might provide an heir." Luna felt heat bloom in her cheeks, but she didn't look away. 3 months ago, the thought of bearing children would have terrified her, the idea of bringing new life into a world that had shown her so much cruelty. But now... "And what did you tell them?" she asked. "That such decisions are between an Alpha and his Luna," Kai said, bringing her hand to his lips to press a soft kiss to her knuckles. "And that when we're ready, we'll know." The tenderness in his voice made Luna's chest tight with emotion. Even in this, the question of children, of legacy, of the future of their pack, he was giving her choice, time, the space to heal completely. "What if I said I might be ready sooner than expected?" she whispered. Kai went very still. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying that for the first time in my life, I can imagine bringing children into the world because I know they'll be protected, loved, raised to believe in their own worth from the very beginning." Luna's smile was radiant. "I'm saying I want to create the family with you that neither of us had growing up." The kiss that followed was soft and deep and full of promises about the future they would build together. When they broke apart, Kai rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he murmured. "I love your strength, your courage, your compassionate heart. I love the woman you've become and the woman you're still becoming." "I love you too," Luna replied, her voice clear and strong and completely unafraid. "Thank you for teaching me that voices are meant to be heard, not silenced. That love is meant to be chosen, not forced. That broken things can be made beautiful again." As the sun began to set, painting the garden in shades of gold and amber, Luna found herself thinking about the woman she'd been when she first arrived at the Shadow Moon Pack 8 years ago. That terrified girl who'd believed silence was the only way to survive, who'd thought herself too damaged for love, who'd convinced herself that invisibility was safety. She felt compassion for that woman now, understanding that her choices had been born from trauma and necessity. But she also felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, to this garden, to this man, to this life she'd never dared imagine possible. Regrets? Kai asked softly, as if he could read her thoughts. Luna considered the question seriously. 8 years of loneliness, of fear, of denying herself the basic human need for connection. The pain Marcus had caused, the damage that still ached on difficult days. The time she and Kai might have had together if she'd been braver sooner. No, she said finally, and meant it. No regrets. Everything I went through, every choice I made, it all led me here. It made me strong enough to love you the way you deserve to be loved. Even the bad parts. Especially the bad parts, Luna said firmly. They taught me the difference between someone who wants to control me and someone who wants to cherish me. They showed me that I could survive anything, which means I never have to be afraid of being vulnerable with you. Kai's arms tightened around her. You never have to be afraid of anything again, he promised. Not while I'm here. I know, Luna said, and for the first time in her adult life, she truly did. But more importantly, I'm not afraid to be strong anymore either. I'm not afraid to use my voice, to take up space, to believe I deserve happiness. As if summoned by her words, a group of young women emerged from the packhouse's back entrance, students from Luna's literacy program, laughing and chattering as they made their way to the evening self-defense class. Several of them waved when they saw Luna and Kai in the garden, their faces bright with the kind of confidence that came from feeling safe and valued. Look what you've built, Kai murmured, watching the women with pride. Look what we've built, Luna corrected again, then raised her voice to call out to the group. Remember what we practiced about finding your center. We will, one of the younger women called back. Thank you, Luna. The sound of her name, spoken with respect, affection, gratitude, still gave Luna chills. For 8 years, she'd been invisible, forgettable, a ghost haunting the edges of other people's lives. Now she was a teacher, a leader, a woman whose voice mattered. A Luna in every sense of the word. Ready to go inside? Kai asked as the last of the students disappeared around the corner. Sarah's making your favorite dessert for dinner. Luna laughed, the sound rich and full of joy. In a minute, she said, turning in his arms so she could look directly into his golden eyes. I want to remember this moment. This perfect, ordinary, extraordinary moment when I'm exactly where I belong. And where is that? Kai asked, though his smile suggested he already knew the answer. Here, Luna said simply. With you. Home. The word home had never meant much to her before. It had been a place to escape from, then a series of temporary shelters, then a carefully constructed prison of silence and fear. But now she understood that home wasn't a place at all. Home was the person who saw your scars and called them proof of your strength. Home was the arms that held you through nightmares and celebrated your victories. Home was the voice that whispered your worth until you finally believed it yourself. Home was love, freely chosen and freely given. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Kai led Luna back toward the packhouse, their fingers intertwined, their hearts beating in perfect synchronization. Behind them, the garden held the memory of a broken woman finding her voice and a lonely king discovering that sometimes the greatest power came from gentleness. And ahead of them stretched a future bright with possibility. Children to love, lives to change, a pact to lead together as true partners. A future where Luna's voice would never again be silenced, where Kai's heart would never again be empty, where two people who had been broken apart could heal completely in the wholeness of their love. In the end, Luna realized as they crossed the threshold into their shared home, some fairy tales were worth fighting for after all. What moment in your own life taught you the difference between surviving and truly living? Luna's journey from silence to finding her voice reminds us that our greatest wounds can become our greatest strengths. I'd love to hear about your own transformation in the comments below. Sometimes the most beautiful endings come from the bravest new beginnings. Thank you for joining Luna and Kai on their journey. Remember, your voice matters. Like, subscribe and share. Patient transformative love is always worth the risk.